This ghost town didn't have any discoveries of gold that made prospectors flock to it. So why would people decide to settle an area so remote and isolated? We'll find out next on Ghost Towns and More. Our story takes us to the beautiful region of southeastern Idaho, where a new town had its early beginnings. In 1879, Chester Call from Bountiful, Utah Territory was driving a herd of horses up through the Portneuf River Valley in Idaho Territory with his niece's husband, Christian Nelson. As they scouted out the area, they located enough water sources to convince them that this was a great place to start a new life, to get away from the crowded areas in the Utah Territory and to build a new settlement. Chester Call was an energetic man with vision, and when he went back to Bountiful, he was persuasive enough with his family, relatives, and friends that he had found a place to settle in a beautiful frontier with plenty of opportunities for farming and ranching.
He was a bishop in Bountiful, Utah, and so he had a large bunch of horses that he needed feed for, so he was exploring a place to find where the homesteading had just become a possibility, and he came here and the grass was knee-deep. And so he went back and talked 12 other families into coming back with him. So he brought some back with him, and that's what started Chesterfield.
So, in 1882, everyone sharing that vision took off for the Northern Territory, with more families coming in 1884. After the families were getting established building homes and ranches, leaders from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints visited the new settlement. Chester was a prominent bishop in his former town of Bountiful and was counseled to plot out the town in a grid pattern, typical of early Mormon settlements throughout the West.
They started building a store. There's been 3 stores here. It was on the Oregon Trail, and so it was used for a variety of reasons. They'd stop to get supplies here, and they would actually bury the dead. One woman died on the way to Oregon, and of course they couldn't hold the body that long to bury it, so they buried it here in Chesterfield. So we have an unknown grave here of someone that was on the Oregon Trail.
One of the leaders, William B. Preston, stood on the most prominent hill in the new town site and exclaimed that it reminded him of Chesterfield, England. He and his other assistants decided to name the new settlement Chesterfield, in memory of the English community and in honor of Chester Call. A church was to be built near the very place where he made his pronouncement. Getting started in this wild environment with harsh winters and dry land meant that everyone had to work together to make a go of it. Chesterfield was never formally incorporated into a town or village. The ecclesiastical organization of the Latter-day Saint ward was sufficient to meet civic and community requirements. Following the belief system of their faith, settlers paid tithing in kind of crops, livestock, and other produce to the town bishop, which were distributed to the less fortunate in the area. One of the first things needed were building materials for the town, and a brick kiln was built just east of the town site, which was used to make bricks for the new church, houses, store, tithing house, and other structures. An estimated 85,000 bricks were made for the meeting house alone. It was the spiritual center of the community and also the political, recreational, educational, and psychological center. Chesterfield was never large, with only about 50 families making up its existence. It was a slow-paced lifestyle, but work was heavy. Women put in long days in the household, caring for children, making beds, preparing meals, cleaning house, and doing dishes. They also worked in gardens, picked fruit, and milked cows. Men and boys also milked cows, fed livestock, cleaned barns and stalls as chores before the heavy work of the day. Those chores were performed twice a day, 365 days per year. Settlers initially grew wheat, but also oats and barley. Many families grew garden vegetables, and especially potatoes. The townspeople wanted and needed to be self-sufficient in the distant and secluded area where they lived. This required that people with various talents were needed in town. In 1886, the residents of Chesterfield posted an ad in the regional newspaper. It read, "What we are most in need of is a good shoe and boot maker and repairer. It would also be necessary for him to understand blacksmithing, tailoring, bricklaying, surgery, medicine, and carpet weaving. With these qualifications, he would be useful and busy at all seasons of the year. He must have a good, sound constitution and great patience and power of endurance. And if he should be a vegetarian, all the better, as most of his pay would be in vegetables." Despite the demanding life of survival in the new area, there were times of celebration and social activities. Dances were a favorite and were held almost weekly in the social buildings. Anyone who could play an instrument, especially the piano, was highly sought after for music for those events. Admission was 50 cents, or a squash, or a chicken, or a few pounds of wheat, or whatever the person could give. The settlers had a good time with each other because financial survival was difficult. Dry farming was a horrendous gamble, and winters were brutally cold. By 1900, there were 418 people living in Chesterfield. But the unique thing about this town is that there were no saloons, gambling halls, or prostitution. There were no shootings and lawlessness to contend with, although there were rowdies who showed up at dances that had to be thrown out. Families had to borrow money to survive each year until their crop harvests in the fall. Because labor was so badly needed, large families were considered an asset rather than a liability. One woman recalled her days in Chesterfield as a mother of 16 children.
The families were large. One without at least 8 or 10 was not considered family. The boys usually were raised to become farmers, and the girls were trained in the duties of the home. Children were allowed to run barefoot until 14 or 15 years. Boys married when they became 18 or 19, and the girls 16 or 17. When the wedding was arranged, big suppers were given at the home of the bride's parents. Emma Tolman.
Irrigation was always a problem, and the winters were severe, such that a farmer or rancher ran the high risk of losing everything they had. One farmer recalled just how bad a winter could be.
The winters were very cold. Sometimes it would get 50 or 60 degrees below zero. The snow would be 6 or 8 feet deep, and in the spring when the snow would crust, it would hold up a team and sleigh. We would go right over the fences and not see them. When it started to thaw, it was impossible to get anywhere. The winters were so bad that we only had school in the summertime. Then schools would be for 3 or 4 months. But we had to stay out a lot to help at home. James Henry Yancey.
Chesterfield was affected by all the wild swings of the economy throughout the country. And in 1907 through 1908, the National Depression hit the community hard. But the weather patterns could make things go from bad to worse.
2 of the pioneers here borrowed $3,000, or they come up with it on their own, and they bought 1,700 head of sheep. And that winter, the degrees of the winter weather went down to 40 to 60 below zero, and all the sheep died. So they lost all of their investment.
Farmers in Chesterfield who had heavily borrowed in the years before became delinquent on payments and lost their farms. One banker in Montana received this letter from a Chesterfield farmer.
I got your letter about what I owe you. Now be patient. I ain't forgot you. Please wait. If this was Judgment Day and you were no more prepared to meet your Maker than I am to meet your account, you sure would have to go to hell. Trusting you will do this, I remain sincerely yours.
The history of Chesterfield residents is a cycle of tragic loss of land, crops, livestock, then starting over again, usually somewhere else. Many left town after just a few years, and freezing crops forced many of them out. Eventually, everyone moved away, leaving Chesterfield a ghost. But the descendants and dedicated volunteers wanted to see the town preserved along with its history. Today it has been restored into a historical site where visitors are welcome and staffed volunteers are on hand to provide tours and answer questions. The buildings tell us much about the ideals and lives of the people who once lived here, and their story is one that shows us how dedication and cooperation within a community can sustain a vision.